Hi, this is Tessa from Ksenia's Guiding Star Astrology Wellness team. I'm the shamanic practitioner in the group. Welcome to my playlist. We're going to do a sort of back to basics video today, just talking about 10 things that I learned along my spiritual path that perhaps might help you, save some time or guide you in the right direction so you don't have to do it the hard way like I did. So I've made a list. The first thing I wrote down was imagination versus insights. So I hear this all the time, clients or people that I'm talking to who are on a spiritual path, and when I say spiritual path, we're all obviously on a spiritual path. That's, who we are. But because we're so disconnected from it, a lot of the time we'll have some sort of awakening, right? We call it an awakening, and we become really interested in the spiritual and we begin to sort of see life differently. When you've done that long enough, your spiritual path becomes your life. There is no separation. So this is kind of what we have to, in my opinion, relearn sometimes, especially in the modern world, because we've gotten, indoctrinated into this idea that there is no spirit, anything that can't be seen isn't there. And, even as a small child, you might have had people telling you like, oh, it's just, you're just imagining it, so it's not real, right? So it's a relearning of who we truly are. It's not so much that we kind of are on a spiritual journey. We were already on a spiritual journey. We just didn't know because we've been told not to believe that, right? So I just want to clarify that. But the first thing I wrote down was the imagination versus insight. So people often tell me, well, how do I know if it's real, what I'm seeing, for example, or if it's imagination? Now, interestingly enough, this mostly happens with visions or things we in various ways see in our mind. I don't often hear people say, I had this feeling or I got this insight and then I doubted it. Not as common. It's usually applied to visions. Yet, and when I say visions, it might be as simple as what you see when you meditate. I'm not saying it has to be, a vision like you had a massive download or something. Yet everyone wants to see. So that's very interesting to me. However, back to, I'm already digressing. As you can tell, I get passionate about these things. So, I went through this too, where I said, how do I know what's real and not? And if you're working, with readings or something like that, you're going to learn very quickly because you'll get feedback from what you're seeing. But that's not really what I'm talking about. Here I'm talking more about what you see on your path, guiding you, or, you take a guided journey, a shamanic journey or a meditation or something, and then you say, maybe I just made that all up. And you have to get past that. The only way, you can't think your way to learn that. It's experiential. You're going to have to, at some point, accept that you don't know at the start. Unless it's super clear, maybe, you do know, but I'm talking about when you don't. And if you can just put the ego aside and allow yourself to have the full experience and just focus on what the message is and what else you're picking up from this. What did you learn? How did it make you feel? How is it guiding you? How is it helping you problem solve? How is it inspiring your art or your next project or who you are as a person? Or how did it enrich your understanding of something that you were, for example, meditating on? So the moment you can let go of that masculine driven, what's real and what's not, you're going to begin to have the experience to learn the difference. And there's no other way, and sometimes spirit will, or often spirit will speak through your imagination because we're working with spirit. It's not tangible. So a lot of the messages you get will be symbolic. It's the message that's being conveyed that matters. And spirit has to use what's in your brain to do that. They can't show you something that you don't know what it is because you're not going to understand what they're showing you or what your higher self is showing you. You are spirit too. So there are so many different ways we get information. And sometimes it will be from your subconscious, and that's fine because the point is, what did you learn? And it can be quite complex when you're getting messages that you don't understand. So as a shamanic healer, sometimes I will see something that I don't know what it is because it's of another world. It's something that, let's say, a star being has placed in your energy field that needs to be removed, right? If I look at that and it's not of this world, I don't understand what I'm looking at. I will know what to do with it, and because this is what I work with and my guides will help me and so forth. But I don't necessarily know what I'm actually looking at. So then I know for sure that it didn't come from me, because I'm trying to work out what I'm seeing, right? But day to day, your imagination is going to be how spirit talks to you. And the moment you embrace that and accept that, the moment you can begin to really learn the difference, and when you see stuff, and a lot of the time spirit will convey things to you that you can understand using things as in your mind, as I said. So for example, because I read tarot professionally for many years, sometimes spirit will show me a tarot card, because they know that I'm going to understand the message. And so what's in your mind is actually helping you. And of course, we are human, we are in a physical form. So sometimes what comes through might just be your subconscious, or it might not be the correct information. But the more you work with it and allow yourself to be in the body you're in, receiving information however it comes to you, the sooner you're going to know when something's really different, or something's showing up that's it doesn't look the way your thoughts look or your imagination usually looks. But most of the time, the message and the feeling and everything else around it is more important. Of course, when you're working with people, there comes a time when you're going to have to know the difference. But for most people, and especially if you're not a practitioner working as a healer, it's more important that you're open and beginning to form these experiences. So that was the first thing. So don't fight your imagination. It's the same as not fighting the mind. If you have an active mind, it is not going to work for you to just turn it off. It's much better to give it something to do. And I think I've talked about this in previous videos. So the second thing I wrote down was the importance of working with and embracing how spirit works with you. So I touched on this earlier on when I said some people just want to see and it doesn't naturally come to them, and then they're kind of just focusing on, I want to see, I want to see, I want to see, but maybe they're having very deep feelings, understandings, and other things that they can tap into much more easily, but that's being shoved aside because you're focusing on, I want to see, I want to see, I want to see, right? So it's so important to understand that it's not about escaping your body, it's not about escaping who you are, it's about fully embracing who you are, how you perceive things. And when you do that, you are going to be able to open up to those other things that perhaps don't come as naturally for you, and you're going to develop what you do have. And again, it's experiential. You can't think your way to it. So this is why when you stop on the first hurdle saying, I just want to see, or I don't know if it's imagination or not, you've completely shut that door. And then you can be there for 5 years where you're not going to get anywhere unless you decide to just embrace exactly what you're experiencing. This reminds me of that book that's called something like, I can't remember what it's called now, but about a man who decided that for a whole year he was going to see absolutely everything that happened in his life as created by him. It's that kind of idea. Embrace everything. And I remember early on my spiritual path, there was someone talking about this. I don't know if it was maybe Ibn Alexander, but there was someone who had quite a scientific mind, like myself, who said, you know what? I'm going to just embrace everything, and I'm going to approach it as if this is, from spirit, it's real, and I'm going to see where I'm at 12 months from now. And by that time, you will have learned, the difference. So working with what comes naturally to you, who you are, and not seeing spirit and your physical senses and everything as separate. It really isn't. We've just forgotten how to use it. So the more you can just embrace everything and be open to kind of how spirit works with you, the faster you're going to develop and learn the difference. So that kind of ties into the first point. The third one, committing and patience. I can hear people like, oh no, I don't want to have patience, because it comes up all the time, right? Who wants to be patient? And we want things to happen so quickly. It's this fast food society where everything has to, be done in a quick weekend course. Doesn't work that way, especially with your spiritual path and with developing, because you have to learn. It's like a brain surgeon. Day one of school, he's not going to be operating on someone, right? It just doesn't work that way. So I find too on the spiritual path that it's there for everyone, whatever you, and I'm being very broad because of course, what do I mean when I say the spiritual path? Is it just you and your inner world? Is it you responding to deep calling to be of service? You know, there's a lot that falls under what we might call the spiritual path. But it comes back to being willing to really have the time, to put in the time and have the patience to develop. And it's all there. It's there for everyone. The difference between people who really embrace it and make it their life is that patience. It's all the times you showed up and meditated or did whatever you do when you didn't get any answers, when you didn't hear anything, you didn't see anything, you thought it was your imagination, nothing amazing happened. You know, I remember back in the day, I used to say, I said to a friend of mine who's a psychic and an astrologer, I said, you know, I will believe the day I see an angel like standing in the corner, full-fledged, wings and all, with my eyes open. Or alternatively, a passed on relative doing the same thing. And she's like, well, it doesn't work that way. It might, but chances are you're going to have to gain faith and trust before you have experiences like that. Not always. Sometimes we're so dense, the spirit comes in and goes, bang, you know, do you get it now? But for most people, unless they have a near-death experience or something that's really kind of shifting everything for them, it's a process. It's kind of like unlocking secrets. It's like a computer game, right? Where you're going to the next level and the next level and the next level, and you're going deeper and deeper and deeper and further and further and further. So the only way to do that is to keep walking and putting one foot in front of the other. It really is an inner journey. And the longer I'm on this path, the more it brings me back to the very core basics of spirituality that, you know, in the West, sometimes we try to dress it up so much and come up with fancy names for it and make it very ethereal. But ultimately, it's quite simple. It comes back to being in stillness, listening, paying attention, you know, commitment and showing up in a very driven way, you know, even when you don't get results. So if you go back to any original spiritual text or original teachings, and what comes to mind is Buddhism, but I'm not on the Buddhist path, so, you know, but I'm thinking of, you know, Buddha under the tree, and even Odin in the Norse mythology, who said, you know, he sacrificed himself to himself on the tree. He was hanging from the tree fasting, and he found the runes. To me, it's very similar to the Buddha under the tree, who had seen suffering, and then he went on this inner journey to say, what do I do now with this information, right? So you got the same themes across all the different spiritual teachings and original texts and so forth. And it comes back to that perseverance, the going within, the shutting out the world to hear yourself. And nowadays, that's really hard. There's just so much information everywhere. And this is where a lot of people will flatline, because we're not ready to do that nitty-gritty deep work unless we're super committed. And then we get focused on, well, I can't because I don't see, or I don't hear, or I don't feel, or it's not fast enough, or, you know, I'm going to go watch TV instead, right? So it's not that you can't get there. It's just that it's going to take an effort, and not effort in a masculine driven way, effort as in showing up in that feminine energy and being receptive. And it will take the time it takes, and you're not going to understand the time it took and why until later on. And then you're going to say, now I get it, I wasn't ready, or I had to learn this first, or I had to shed that first, or whatever it is. Okay, moving on. So the fourth thing I wrote was, actually I kind of touched on that there, the balancing of the masculine and feminine. This used to be extremely out of balance in me, and I see this in a lot of clients, and a lot of people notice it in themselves, where they're constantly in scarcity or thinking about things from the rational perspective, or very kind of step by step, linear, coming from heavy things like, what if I'm judged, what if there's not enough, all these things that's carried down through the generations. And we really have to embrace the feminine a lot to let that go. And it's about balance. It's not that we become so floaty that we're just sitting there waiting for, you know, money to fall from the sky or something. But it's because the feminine is generally so pushed aside. For a lot of us, we almost have to go the opposite way, like really leaving structure behind for a while to find that trust and to see that It's not 1 + 1 is 2, right? So an example would be when you take the step onto a path like I've had, where you don't have a paycheck, right? Where you're, you know, if you have clients, you have clients. If you don't, you don't. But then from the Western perspective, a lot of people will go, well, I can't do that because, you know, my paycheck's going to be gone. So unless I now know for sure that my new venture is going to replace my paycheck, then I can't do it. And to some extent, that's true. Of course, we can't just quit our jobs and live off nothing, right? But there comes a time when you're going on a venture like that, you have to tune in enough and trust spirit enough that money might come another way. So this is just an example. I'm not, you know, specifically talking about moving into non-traditional work here. But it's a good example for me because, you know, I see it all the time. The moment you can understand that when you have this deep connection with spirit, and when you begin to live your life from the idea that you're the alchemist, you're the magician, you can create whatever you want, and you've worked through enough of your stuff and your projections and your shadow and all of that to actually be able to listen to your intuition, so you know when it's time to act and when it's time not to, when it's time to quit something or take an opportunity or not to, right? When you've done that beginning inner work and you can begin to listen, you'll find that sometimes, you know, you are able to, for example, quit a job and take a leap of faith, and not necessarily because your new job is going to replace the old one, but because maybe money came from somewhere else. So it's a very different way of living life when you come into a connection with the feminine, where you see yourself as, you know, a creator of your reality, and you can work with energy and the blueprint in your life as opposed to what's already manifested, right? So you can apply that to anything. I'm just using work and money as an example because that's one of the places I see a lot of people getting stuck, where, you know, you have a dream and then you stop before you try because you think it has to kind of 100% replace what you were doing. It's very common. So when we begin to see it as we're working with energy, we're working with a blueprint, we are going to know when it's time to let the past go and shut that door and fully leap into the future. But when we're operating from the masculine, that's very difficult because we don't know, because we're not tuning in. So, you know, then it is, you know, what we're fearing is true. If we quit our job, there wouldn't be a paycheck the day after, right? So I hope that makes sense to people. If it didn't, let it go. It's, you know, it's probably not a very, it kind of is a basic concept, but it can also be hard to understand unless you've lived it, I think. But I think it's a good example of how we have to balance the masculine and feminine, and especially on our spiritual path, where if we want to change and, you know, fulfill our purpose and work with something we love, or create a new reality for ourselves. But it does take inner work. So the next point I wrote down was number 5, that it's experiential. So I touched on this before, that the spiritual path can't be learned through listening to someone else's story, reading books, taking courses. Those things can open you up to understanding how to work with your mind, how to work with spirit, how other people have done it, you know, the concepts of what's out there, you know, what's really happening in the universe. People have gone before you, might be able to point you in the right direction or shed some light on things that, you know, and open up your mind to a bigger reality than perhaps you were aware of. But ultimately, it's not about sitting at home and listening to other people's stories. It's about walking this path all the time, every day, in every moment, right? And that's hard. That's hard. And, you know, it takes fearlessness. It takes you being willing to look at yourself, what's really going on under the surface, where are you projecting, where's your shadow coming up. You know, I did the shadow work video last week, so you can go back to that one. But it's very empowering, but it takes commitment and patience, like I said at the start. So it really is an inner journey, and because everything is so dependent on your unique makeup, genetically, you know, spiritually, your history, what you're aware of, what you're not aware of. So even opening up to, you know, your intuition and everything is going to be very different for different people. And, you know, I can explain to you how spirit shows me something, but that's not necessarily going to apply to how spirit's going to show you that, because you're not me. So everyone is so different. And the moment you stop trying to have someone else's experience and you accept where you're at and how Spirit's guiding you the moment you actually begin to walk your own path or go deeper on your own path. The sixth thing I wrote down was programs, techniques, all these things that we see a lot of nowadays available within the spiritual community are less important than listening and stillness. It all comes back to being receptive. And for most of us, that's really hard because our brain's going 100 miles an hour. And, if you've never shut your phone off for 24 hours, you probably haven't heard your own voice for a long time. And it's quite interesting, even someone like me who, I'm not on my phone too much, I use it for work and what I need, but I'm not going to be scrolling through it because I got other stuff that I'd prefer to do. But even so, when I shut my phone off or put it on Do Not Disturb or whatever and put it aside for, 12 hours or so, it's quite incredible how much my mind starts to kind of talk to myself. I can hear my own thoughts again. So even if you're not on technology a lot, it's just the nature of the modern world. There's just so much information coming in. So step one is really beginning to put your phone away. And it's, and as I said, even if you're not someone who think you're on your phone a lot, like I thought I wasn't, then I got one of those programs that told me how many times a day I open my phone. And a lot of it was just to, internet banking, checking what time it is, taking a photo, completely stuff that's not necessarily online or anything. But oh my God, it was ridiculous how many times a day I'd open my phone. And I thought, wow, I wonder what I would have done with all that time in the past, right? So it's really, really good to put everything away. And I would go to the point that you put it in another door and you close in another room and you close the door if you can, because you are going to reach for your phone and go, I need to find this out. I should just Google, how far does the hummingbird fly, something. And you're like, do I really need this information right now? This is my day off, right? So I think it's so important to take that step back to be able to hear yourself. So a lot of the time, instead, what we do is we're filling ourselves with information all day. We go to work, we listen to people, we're listening to a podcast in the car, we're watching YouTube on our lunch break, we're responding to emails. So when we come home, we have the whole world in our head. Then we switch the TV on, then there's the news. And by the end of the day, you don't even know what your own thoughts are. This might not apply to everyone. I'm giving you worst case scenario here. So then you sit down for 10 minutes going, I'm going to make time for my spiritual path and I'm going to listen in. Of course, you can't hear yourself because there's so much to sift through first. So a big part of it is just becoming very aware of what we're absorbing or not, what we're saying yes to or not. And when we're watching, for example, TV with commercials, we're taking that in, right? So we've made the choice to make space for that. And that's space that you could have listening to your own thoughts. So I'm not saying to go live in a cave and, get off YouTube, keep watching my videos. But there's a balance. And a lot of the time we really kind of forget about that because it's just how life is. So it's not that you can't listen and you can't receive. It's just that sometimes it takes a bit of practice to learn to be still. Can you go and sit with some gentle music in a room, drinking a tea, watching the tree outside or the sunset or the moon or the stars for half an hour without feeling like you need to do something? If not, and if you're not used to being in ceremony and stillness and what I call active meditation, that is a very big thing to learn, to be able to truly connect. And when you do that enough, you get to a point where that becomes how you live your life, It depends how far you want to go on your spiritual path. Not everyone's going to go down, a deep path like I have as a shamanic practitioner. You might not need to do that in your life. Might not be what you're here to do at all. But I'm just sharing what I've learned that's really, things that I wish I would have known 11 years ago and would have saved me some time. So the seventh thing I wrote down was work with your mind. So I touched on this before. When I say work with your mind, I mean, if you have an active mind, or you're not used to meditating, or you're not used to being in stillness, it's unlikely that it's going to work for you to just sit down, shut your eyes, and do nothing, right? So give your mind something to do. Repeat a word, a phrase, paint, do, a little display with flowers or with food or with sand or with crystals or stones or sticks or leaves. Give your mind something to do. it's kind of like when you're cleaning the house, right? And you get into a really meditative state because your mind's busy focusing on where your body is and what you're touching and what shelf you're cleaning, and you begin to hear your thoughts because your mind's busy doing something else. And you can apply that in your spiritual path. But when you're trying to just completely shut the mind out, generally doesn't work. Not at the start, at least. The 8th thing I wrote down was layers, and that the path is circular. So what you find is that the spiritual path and your inner healing and your spiritual development isn't going to be linear. It's not a situation of, I've now fixed this, it's done forever. Sometimes it can be, but a lot of the time you'll come back to it, but it will cycle back with a different lesson or a deeper lesson or a deeper understanding, or it'll cycle back just to show you that you have learned that and now you can understand something else about it. So of course there are cycles and patterns in your life that you want to break. That's kind of part of freeing yourself from, you know, the ego mind and all of that, right? But sometimes it's those cyclical, that's how you pronounce it, right? I know I said it wrong the other day and my husband said that's not how you say it. Sorry, English is my second language, but so the cyclical nature of your spiritual path is kind of different from the cycles that you see that are destructive and repeating. So for example, if you're in a cycle where you do great self-care for 2 weeks and then slowly it starts to sneak up on you that you skip it, or you're not fully invested, or you start eating a ton of sugar or have too many coffees again, or whatever you do when you self-sabotage, right? That's not a cycle of learning, that's a cycle of self-sabotage. So you'd want to, you know, address that, right? But when it comes to deep lessons you learn, a lot of the time they will come back and you'll be able to see what you've learned and you can understand and shed another layer. Because a lot of things come back to the same core wounds or the same core problems or the same core aspects of yourself. But I also find that it's the spiritual path and your healing journey is cyclical in terms of how you're feeling or how you're processing things. So you might just feel really light and happy and excited, and then comes that time of it's time to work on something again, and it takes you down this kind of shadow work hole so that you can release another layer, and you keep cycling through these processes till you're able to kind of bring yourself back to center much more quickly. And you can see when you're, you know, swaying into scarcity or fear or whatever it is for you. So it's not that, you know, we learn in the West so often that it's, you know, we take step 1, step 2, step 3, like on the career ladder, and it doesn't work that way with your spiritual path. It's generally going to be more of a looping growth, like a loop going upwards, right? The 9th thing I wrote down was that your spiritual path is your life. So in the West, I feel we've made the spiritual journey something we kind of do on the side, or, oh, I'm interested in the spiritual path, or I'm doing that half an hour a day, but the rest of the day I'm not. The rest of the day I'm fully in kind of my physical reality. And we have to get to the point where we merge the two, because if you believe that you're spirit, if you believe in energy, if you believe that you can create and change and shift things through the energetic, you know, if you tune into the archetype of the magician and then the alchemist, if you believe that you can create, you know, why wouldn't you want to do that 24 hours a day? Why wouldn't you want to be in that constant flow of energy where you don't have to strive so much, or, you know, where you're more in the flow and you're kind of going with spirit? So it can take a long time to get to that point, but ultimately, you know, how did our spiritual path get separated from us in the first place? You know, we are spirit, in my opinion. So you get to a point where, you know, everything you approach is going to come from that perspective. And I think I might have made this example in another video, so I apologize if I'm repeating myself, but it's a good example. I quit a job after 7 years, and I gave myself about 6 weeks to find something else and blah blah blah. But then the other job I ended up starting, I got to the point where they got new owners at this holistic shop I was working at, and they started getting rid of a lot of the old stuff. So I had a side gig of working on a psychic chat, and I thought, okay, this is now my opportunity to go full-time working for myself on this chat to see if that's, you know, something I can do. Whereas before I had thought, you know, I can do both so that I don't have to put myself in, you know, under financial pressure, because of course the chat was depending on how many clients I had, and I didn't know how many I was going to have, right? But I got to the point where they got rid of the staff and I got fired, and I said, okay, so I can now start looking for another job that's just going to kind of buffer me, or I can leap into this new working from home for myself that I had been dreaming of for a long time. So this was before my shamanic path. And earlier on, I would probably have just desperately gone to look for another job. But I spent one moment thinking about that and my body just shut down. I was like, no, I'm not getting another job. I'm going to go full time with this path now. And it was an intuitive hit, but I could only do that because I had spent a long time tuning into myself. So I knew that was the moment to act, or not to act, you know, to embrace and receive and you know, go down a different road than I would have 5 years earlier. But I didn't do that overnight. I had learned to tune in to the point that I knew that's what I was being guided to do. And I didn't think twice. It was a 2-second thing. I just said, okay, that's it. I'm not taking on another job. And here I am, not that many years later, and I'm working with what I love. So, but I had done a lot of preparation work to get there, right? So this is where the commitment and knowing yourself and your body, your mind, and your spirit is so important, because if I hadn't at that point done some shadow work or had healing and so forth, you know, I would have acted out of scarcity and fear, and I would have said, you know, 1 + 1 is 2. So if I don't get another job, I'm going to starve, right? And that would probably have been true 5 years earlier. But at that point, I could feel that I was being guided towards this, and that spirit would help me and that things would work out some way, right? So I also want to acknowledge that this is me talking from many years of spiritual development, you know, living in the West, being privileged essentially. So I understand that what I'm talking about doesn't necessarily apply to everyone. You know, my grandma, when she went through the Holocaust, if she didn't get a job, she would have starved, right? So I'm not being ignorant to the suffering that's out in the world, that we all have to work to make a living. But I'm saying there's a point when you're generally cared for and you're being called into growth and into working with what you love. If you're living in a country where you have the ability to do that, you know, where you're not starving, for example, and then we stop ourselves because of fear. But please don't think that I'm saying this from the perspective as, you know, someone living under the poverty line can just manifest money randomly. That's not my point. So the 10th thing I wrote down was joy and having faith in miracles. So the joy is so important. Having fun and doing what you love, you know, spirit loves that. That's what you're here to do. You're not here to do something you don't enjoy. Where did we ever get the idea that we're going to be working with something that makes us sad and unhappy and stressed? How did we all accept that truth, right? What a radical thing to think that we're actually meant to do something we enjoy. You know, it's a really radical thought still, and it's mind-blowing. Imagine you're this special being that has maybe 100 years on this planet if you're lucky, and you're going to spend it doing something you don't like, that makes you sad. It's just a mind-blowing thing we've been kind of brainwashed with, right? And as I said, we're also lucky. This is a time where, you know, all the harshness and COVID stuff aside, a lot of people are now living in a world where there are more opportunities. You don't have to, you know, have a ton of money to set up a business. There's stuff you can do online, which you can even start for free nowadays. So we have opportunities that, for example, my dad wouldn't have had when he started his truck driving company, right? So for him to say, yes, just follow your dreams, and, you know, in a kind of loosey-goosey way would not have been good advice. What he did say was follow your dreams, but he said, get educated, work hard, because that's what he knew, and that worked for him. So even in the last 30 years, there's been such a difference and shift in the world. So I think our consciousness and our brains are kind of catching up with that, and we still have a lot of that scarcity mentality of, you know, like my parents' generation still there, because that was their reality. But things are happening very quickly now. And, you know, whatever you do and whatever you work with, beginning to tune into how you can create from, you know, knowing yourself and working with energy is going to help you. It doesn't necessarily mean you can't have a traditional job, but it just makes life a little bit easier and more fun. So I kind of got back to work there because it's, to me, working with what I love has been such a big part of the spiritual journey. I thought it was really sad when I had a job that took up all my time that I couldn't stand, you know. So for a lot of people, I think, oh, I'm just seeing, I think maybe my camera's getting full. Anyways, I'm almost finished here. So the joy is one thing, and when I say faith in miracles, yes, of course, I have faith in actual miracles, but what I'm talking about here is coming back to the fact that Spirit will guide you and help you in ways that you don't even see coming. So you don't have to work everything out yourself. Things will come your way when you align, when you show up, when you trust, and when you show up first. And you close the back doors and you say, Spirit, show me, show me. And, you know, it takes guts to begin to live life that way, but it's absolutely beautiful when your spiritual path merges with, you know, your life, with your physical body, with your physical reality, with your work, and with everything you do and every person in your life. And it's just absolutely magical. So have patience, put in the time to get to know yourself, put in the time to have stillness, to be able to hear yourself, and Spirit will guide you. But it is an inner journey that you have to take. So those were my 10 tips, you know, things that I've learned along the path that I wish I knew earlier on. But if I did, maybe I wouldn't have been here making this video for you. So maybe I had to live through it the hard way myself. To book a session with me, head over to guidingstarsastrology.com. We'll link it below. Look in the wellness team, and you can book in there if you want to experience shamanic healing, if you're ready to shed things, work on something in your life. And I will talk to you in the next video. Much love. Bye.